well with each other for a long time. So one side of her family's Chinese and the other's Korean, and that's not like just being Asian. And she says constantly her Asian relatives, if she does something they don't like, say, that's her Chinese relatives will say, that's the Korean side coming out. And then she goes to a Korean party and they say, boy, we can sure tell the Chinese side over there because we certainly wouldn't do what that is. Leslie is a person who was Filipino and Caucasian, and she had another relative who was married into the family, who was Filipino, had married into her Caucasian family. And she says, we sat at Thanksgiving dinner last year, and they were constantly criticizing her Filipino aunt. And she says, I was so uncomfortable. She says, I'm not going to Thanksgiving dinner anymore. If all they're going to do is make fun of the Filipino side food. Karen, she's the one that had the brother who was Caucasian and thought he was Asian. She was talking about how her Korean cousin was complaining because Koreans rejected her. And she said, and she was also half white, and she said, I wonder why they reject me. And remember, people like this are always thinking about why is it people do this. Anyway, Karen said to her cousin, well, it could be because you're half white. Korean was fine, but Korean and white, we don't like the white side. Or she says, maybe they think you're Japanese. Looking Asian doesn't tell you what kind of Asian. That's cultural, not racial. So she says, they may not know that you're a Korean kind of Asian. Maybe you should identify to them that you're Korean. More examples. Deanna is somebody who is black and Korean. Her mother was a Korean war bride. Her father was black. And she had a fascinating experience when she worked in a store. And it was a Korean-owned store. So black people came in the store. And she says, on one occasion, I had occasion to talk to another worker. And she says, I spoke in what I guess people would call black English. And she says, I thought the black customer would drop her purse. And she said, where'd you learn to talk like that? And so she said, you sound just like us. So she said, well, my dad's black. And she says, girl, you're black. And she says, well, I'm black. And no, you're black. Because I say you have to be both. You can't be both. Teresa and Derek are both African American and Caucasian. And they both complained, well, they both talked about names like being called yellow or crows or zebras. They're derogatory terms for being mixed race. Derek said, they're terms of endearment. They didn't bother him at all. Teresa thought they were insulting. So it all depends upon, I would say, in part, the way the person takes it, and in part, the way it's spoken by the community. And then I already told you about the Mexican Puerto Rican woman who was told to forget about the Mexican side when you come to my Puerto Rican parties. Question. Which is worse, being multiracial or multicultural? Most people will tell you that race is worse. I think both whites and blacks would say being a different race is harder. Because of the U.S. preoccupation with skin color. Because it's always there. You can't escape it. If you are in a different culture, a lot of times you know ways that you can pass. You can not use certain words, or not wear certain clothes, or not talk certain ways. And people might not know what, if you don't tell them your Italian name, they don't know that you're Italian. And passing may be possible. For ethnic differences, but not for racial differences. For racial differences, it's usually not. And several people said outsiders feel more free to insert their views. They can tell you things because it's such an obvious difference. Karen made she was part Asian, said that it was more for exclusion than inclusion. I want to know where you are so I know you're not like me. Not, I want to know who you are so I know you are like me. She felt it was usually for exclusion. So most people thought race was worse. However, I thought it was really interesting that one of my respondents, Evelyn, who was both, who was Chinese and Caucasian, so she's both a different culture, Chinese and American, and a different race. And she said, it's culture. Culture's worse. And her explanation was that being different culture was harder because race is just outside. Culture affects everything you do. It affects the way you think, it affects the way you behave, it affects the rules you follow. And so if you're of different cultures, then this constant clash about all the way you do things, the way you act, the way you think, and they were constantly having, in her family, disagreements about the way people did things because the culture was so different. Okay, what are some of the factors? Let's see how much time I have left. I know I've planned for far more than I can do. Do you just want me to keep going, or do you want me to open it for questions and let people ask questions instead?
You might want to ask some questions.
Okay, let me look and see how many. But if you've got some, yeah, I've got about 5 more slides to do. So if you got questions. If they don't, I'll keep going.
Yes, right.
Okay. One of them is obviously appearance. And so if you look like a different race and you didn't own up to it, people were upset. For instance, Anita was the Mexican Puerto Rican woman who was dark-skinned. And she said she was constantly being criticized by blacks for not owning up to being black. Why won't you recognize you're really black? She said, because I'm not. I'm Mexican. Leslie is the Korean, and she said in high school, her Spanish teacher came up, the Spanish teacher in the school, not her Spanish teacher, came up to her and was talking Spanish to her. And then got angry with her because she didn't know Spanish. Hispanics should learn their language. So I'm not saying. But, and actually, almost every time I give this, I will have people come up to me and say, boy, I'm mixed background, and that's what happens. Surname is assumed to indicate identity. Sam was assumed to be Italian. Vicky, who had an Irish father, was assumed to be Irish when she identified herself as Jewish. It ignores the influence of the paternalism in our surnames and the impact of marriage in our surnames. So people are walking around with surnames that bear no relation to what their heritage is. For one thing, a lot of kids feel closer to their mother's culture because the mother raises the kids. And yet they're walking around with their dad's name, which is a different culture. So everybody says, oh, you must be Italian. Yeah, but I feel closer to the Irish part. And it also ignores the fact that women get married. I had an experience myself. My father was Irish, my mother was French-speaking Belgian, and I have a very German-sounding name, except if you go to Germany, and if you go to Germany, they have no idea where it came from because they don't think it sounds German at all. And so people were always, you know, are you German? And I remember meeting somebody who looked at me and said, what was your maiden name? And I told him, he says, I knew it, I knew you were Irish, because I look Irish. If you're Irish, you think I look Irish. You may not think I look Irish. Irish people think I look Irish. Culture, a lot of times religion plays, culture is an example of religion. One of the, well, this is, again, one of my respondents, Peggy, who was Irish in Belgium. And she said the two sides weren't comfortable with each other. And she really wasn't aware of it until she grew up and realized that a lot of the things that happened probably were because that's why they didn't visit much. And on the other hand, Brian, who's another